This session is on the new models of leadership, and I'm going to call up three of my colleagues in the journalistic profession to join me here to talk about this. We have, I guess, last is David Gellis. He's a New York Times journalist who just published a book. Thank you for coming up.
Do you want David here?
No, David can go. David can sit at the end. Thank you. David Gellis just published a book called Dirtbag, Billionaire. He's on his book tour and is flying around talking to people about this book. It's a biography of Yvon Chouinard, who's the founder of Patagonia, and a model, interesting model of leadership. His previous book was the opposite, What Not to Do, The Man Who Broke Capitalism, how Jack Welch essentially
screwed up the country.
Screwed up the country, okay. Next to me is Stephanie Mehta. She is CEO and Chief Content Officer at Mansueto Ventures, which is the parent company of Inc. and Fast Company. She's a former top editor at Fortune, Bloomberg, and elsewhere. She also was a reporter whose work I greatly envied when we were at the Wall Street Journal together in our youth. And sitting in the middle, we have Isabel Berwick from the Financial Times. She leads their Working It brand, which covers the workplace, future of work, management, and leadership. She writes a great weekly newsletter, which is also called Working It, and wrote the book, The Future-Proof Career, which is now out in paperback. Years ago, she was one of David's editors as well. So we're gonna dive in. The goal for the session is to talk about the new models of leadership amid all of the changes to context. And frankly, like Patagonia is, when you ask people like, what's a successful humanistic leadership style? Patagonia is actually, the company. And at some point you start people talk about, at some point you start thinking like, well, are they just, is there just one of these companies in the country that is capable of doing this? But actually in your book, in Dirtbag Billionaire, you say that all businesses and everyone who works has much to learn from the way that Patagonia team had forged a new path through the wilds of late capitalism. Can you give us hope that there are things that the rest of us can bring to our leadership styles and workplaces?
Well, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. The book, as you note, it spans more than 70 years, really. It tells the whole story of Yvon Chouinard, his role creating Patagonia, also Black Diamond. He also built that company as well. But when I look back and sort of tried to understand what allowed Patagonia to become the company that we all have in our sort of popular imagination, it actually started right at the beginning. And what he did and what the executive team, which is really a collection of friends, did 50 years ago is something we can all do, which is understand what we believe in and stick to it. And so what was extraordinary about this narrative is the consistency. Back in 1973, when Chouinard and his team founded this company, they understood that they cared about a few core things. They understood that they wanted to take good care of their people. They understood that they wanted to run a responsible business and have as clean of a supply chain as they could. And they understood that they wanted to use the profits from their company to fund large-scale land conservation and grassroots environmental activism. Now, they wouldn't have articulated it maybe quite so concisely at the moment, but if you look back, and I read everything that's ever been written, every interview that they've ever given since the 70s, those core values were intact. And what happened is, over the years, as the company grew, as they got more resources, as the business got more complex, they had to come back to those values and evaluate their decision-making against those sort of North Stars. And the issues got more complicated. The problems got more complicated. But they never wavered from those same three or so principles. And as a result, Patagonia sort of got more and more powerful in its ability to express that brand identity and to say with real conviction that they weren't just full of it, they actually cared about those things. But it's the consistency, I think, that distinguishes the company, and that's consistency that we can all come up with when we understand what our core values are.
Yeah, so what were there any key moments, or like it's one thing to have values and it's another thing to have them tested. And were there any key moments or practices that they used in the face of real challenges to their values?
Yeah, I mean hundreds and hundreds, and they're all in the book. But I would home in on just a couple, which is those moments that require sacrifice. And I'll note up front, Patagonia and Chenard were able to make sacrifices because he had control of the company.
Yeah.
And so ownership and control is a whole separate conversation.
No quarterly earnings presentation.
None of that, no external shareholders. So, but setting all that aside, what happened is there were these critical moments. I'm thinking of a time, even before he founded the clothing company that would become Patagonia, he was a blacksmith. He was making just rock climbing gear. And he understood that the products he was making were actually damaging the rock walls in Yosemite. And he had to make this decision. Does he want to continue making a product that he knows is causing harm, or is he going to pivot? And he pivoted, and it jeopardized 90% of his revenues.
Yeah.
But he trusted he would figure out, or he resolved that he would do something else because he knew that he didn't want to cause damage with the products he was creating. That same phenomenon, that same dynamic repeated almost 20 years later in the late 80s when Patagonia understood that the conventional cotton it was using was treated with formaldehyde and was causing all sorts of health problems, not only in its workers, but in the workers in the cotton fields. And again, Chenard said, enough, we're not going to use conventional cotton anymore. His team came to him and they said, that could cost us 20% of revenues next year. And he said, that's okay, figure it out. But it was that willingness to make sacrifices, to stand up for those core values that repeats itself over and over.
Stephanie, do you see behavior like that at the leadership of American companies today? And do you have, that may be a short answer. And then what do you think enlightened leadership looks like in 2025?
I have the privilege of publishing Inc. and Fast Company, wherein we cover a lot of founder-led companies. And so I would say that the companies we cover, which are led by founders like Von Schoenard, do possess that kind of leadership. And one thing I would add, and this is not a company that I think most people would hold up as an exemplar of being a mission-driven company the way Patagonia is, but I think back to the earliest days of Amazon, where Jeff Bezos said in his letter to shareholders, if you're expecting quarterly earnings to rise 15% a quarter, every quarter, this is not the company for you. There are going to be times where I'm going to invest and we're going to lose money. There are going to be times where those investment pays off and we're going to have a spike in earnings. But I'm letting you know right now, shareholders, that I'm going to run a very different kind of company. And one could argue, again, not mission-driven in the way Patagonia is, Amazon is very mission-driven. They are obsessed with their consumer, they are obsessed with their customer, and they will do all kinds of things, some of which we may not agree with. It's not great for landfills, but they will do all kinds of things to make that customer happy. So I would say that when it comes to setting a mission, understanding what your values are, and not wavering from those, you could point to Amazon. I would say there are a lot of other companies that are founder-led, that are privately held, that are doing a lot of the things that Patagonia is doing. It's amazing the number of founders I've talked to in just the last week and a half who've referenced David's book. They're all reading it, and they are all students of what Patagonia has done because they're trying to bring that same longevity and sense of mission to their companies.
So it's the long view. And when you talk about Amazon, it reminds me of the Google founders IPO shareholder letter, which basically said, don't invest in this company because we're not going to be focused on what investors want. We're going to take a long-term view.
They also said, don't be evil. But
they had said, don't be evil.
Exactly.
How has that weathered? So you write the Modern CEO newsletter. What are the biggest misconceptions that you see leaders having right now about what their role needs to be?
I wouldn't, I'm going to flip that a little bit. I wouldn't say it's a misconception. I think leaders say that they want to listen to their employees and listen to their customers and listen to their different stakeholders, but I don't think they're listening hard enough. It's very easy. It's a talking point that I think a lot of leaders like to trot out, and I don't doubt the sincerity of their of the intent, but what it means to really, really listen to your people and act on it, and listen to your customers and act on it, and listen to your stakeholders and act on it is, it requires a level of commitment and a level of time that I don't think most leaders have actually committed to.
And in fact, a bunch of leaders are saying, like, this whole stakeholder capitalism thing where we actually listen to and care about those people. Some of them actually are very explicitly leaving that behind as well.
Yeah.
Isabel, I want to pull you in as well. We're in a moment where the biggest challenges for a lot of leaders is navigating uncertainty and actually change management as AI and other economic factors actually change the environment in which they're operating. From your reporting, are there approaches to that you'd recommend that people emulate that seem to be more successful for leaders?
Yeah, I think we're in very early days, but what I would say and what I hear over and over again is that leadership is transformation at the moment. That is the core of it. And if you're not thinking that or doing that, you're not really leading at the moment, because there is so much uncertainty, but companies in 5 years' time are not going to look like they look like now. And how do we get from here to here? That's the challenge. And I think the leaders who are doing well are the ones who are still listening, but who are also empowering their teams. And I think the people who will do very badly, and I'm waiting to see this happen in real time, are the micromanagers, because actually the time of reckoning may have come for the micromanagers, yay. But I've been waiting 30 years of my career for this, but hasn't happened yet. But I really think this might be the time, because rigidity is not possible anymore.
Yeah.
And I think some companies will stumble.
We've done some reporting and interviews with Ron Heifetz of Harvard, who pioneered adaptive leadership, and that's exactly the thing, like leaders letting go a bit of their micromanaging and control and decentralizing, being open to experimentation. Your book is called The Future-Proof Career, but I want to ask you, what does future-proof leadership look like?
What does it look like at the moment? I think, and actually it was really interesting you were talking about consistency, David, because I was going to say consistency. Sometimes we can't be consistent in what we're doing, but we can be consistent in our support for teams. Yeah. We can be consistent in the messaging we give to our people. So that, I think, and the other C I really like is curiosity. And that's a very overused jargony word, but what do I mean by that? I mean reading outside or watching outside our comfort zone, cross-sector talk. I go to so many conferences, with respect, love this conference, but sometimes going to cross-sector conferences is really illuminating. And the second part of that kind of curiosity piece is about yourself as a leader, and maybe that's therapy to understand why you behave the way you do, but actually more it's about understanding how we as humans don't change. The fact that a team of 4 or 5 people is going to be better than a team of 6 or 7 people, because that's how we operated when we were hunter-gatherers. We haven't changed. Yeah. And I think not enough leaders really think about that. The shiny tech is distracting us. Yeah. One of the contexts that has changed for businesses is the intensity of the pushback against things like DEI and sustainability and hybrid and remote work in some cases. David, one of your hats is as a New York Times reporter covering climate and sustainability. And what are you seeing among, what is the enlightened leadership approach to the intensity of the pushback of their taking stands, making statements, being explicit about a commitment to sustainability, DEI, hybrid work, and things like that?
Well, 8 years ago, I was the reporter at the New York Times who was really tasked full-time with covering corporate America's response to the first Trump administration. Yeah. And it felt like literally hardly a day, and certainly not a week, went by when I wasn't writing about the Business Roundtable speaking out against this administration, Trump won, CEOs resigning from the CEO advisory councils, CEOs taking to Twitter and saying that this is un-American. The things we're seeing out of the White House 8 years ago are simply not in line with the values we have as a company. Fast forward 8 years, many of those CEOs are still in the same jobs. And when the Trump administration pulled out of the Paris Agreement, the same CEOs that said, we don't believe in this 8 years ago, didn't say a thing. Yeah. And at just about every moment where this administration is being more extreme in their policies, just about every CEO who spoke up last time is absolutely silent. Yeah. And I'll just invoke the work of Barbara Walter, who wrote a book called How Civil Wars Start. And I saw her speak last week, and she made a really shocking note, which was that in Brazil, which flirted with autocracy in recent years, it was the business community that brought that nation back from the edge. The business community spoke out and said, this is not acceptable. Whereas in Hungary, a company that you could argue has sort of slid into autocracy, the business community stayed silent. And in the room where she made those remarks, I think it made clear just what a fundamentally important role corporate America needs to be playing in the political discourse at a critical moment like this.
That makes a lot of sense. And then you talk to leaders who, in theory, align with, with that view, the importance of them taking stands on societal issues, and their instinct was to do it 8 years ago. And what they say now is, I can't do this because I'm going to be attacked. My family is going to be physically threatened. I'm going to definitely on X. There's going to be all sorts of toxic attack. It could impact, people could boycott me, on and on and on and on. And, they very quickly get to the threat that this represents for themselves personally and their business. In light of that, what's to be said? And is there, Stephanie, I don't know if you have any models for how leaders are responding to that, or David, if Yvon Chouinard offers us any inspiration on that specific climate.
Well, listen, I understand why CEOs are afraid, and I think there's many reasons. I think the personal attacks are scary in theory, but I guess my mind is going to a moment in January. It was the day after President Trump had been inaugurated, and I was in Davos, and President Trump was in the room, and he personally, in front of the whole World Economic Forum, attacked Brian Moynihan, the CEO of Bank of America, by name. Yeah. And he went after him publicly. And it was this sort of shocking moment. The CEO is personally attacking a CEO. I mean, 9 months later, Brian's still in the job. Bank of America is doing fine. So I guess I'm just questioning whether that fear that's in the air is fully justified, frankly. I mean, we know that this is a president who talks a lot, who does call names, and yet is that reason enough for the men and women stewarding our nation's most important corporations to not stand up if that's what they feel, again, to those values that I spoke about earlier on, are consistent and in line with what they really believe in at a moment when the hour is pretty critical? That's a choice they all have to make, not me.
Yeah.
But I share that as one possible reference point about just whether or not it is so scary.
And I think there's strength in numbers.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at what happened when the bank CEOs all together said, you can't interfere with the Fed. Like the health of our financial system and our banking system depends on an independent Fed. Don't monkey with the Fed. Now, we know that probably will not have an impact, but when Jane Fraser and Jamie Dimon and Brian Moynihan, and they all get together and they say, as the CEOs of the nation's largest banking companies, we oppose interference in the Federal Reserve, there is a sort of gravitas and also sort of air cover that they get by coming together. So I think there can be more instances where groups of CEOs and groups of business leaders come together.
So as you were talking earlier about CEO or leaders of organizations not listening to customers and workers sufficiently, one of the things that was coming to mind for me was this question of trust, which I think is probably related. And interestingly, if you go at the Edelman Trust Barometer, tracks.
Are you going to say that media has the lowest trust numbers?
No.
Because
everyone knows that, and Svenja confirmed that our jobs are in danger, and we're just.
No, it's raining outside. It's a dark day for me.
You all are on your own.